Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, on top of COVID-19, who knew this was going to happen in the United States? We've had protests that started out to be peaceful that have turned into what some people would call riots, and then we've had looting. And I'm not sure about you, but I've been glued to my TV first a couple months ago for COVID-19, and then the last weekend watching what's going on in the United States. And so I really wanted to get a few people that I know that are really interested in this topic together to have a discussion. And so first of all, let's just introduce everyone. Caesar from New York, tell us about who you are and where you're from.
Hi, good evening, beautiful humans. My name is Caesar F. Barajas. I am a well-known international wellness mentor and advocate, currently on staff as an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Teachers College, where I teach mindfulness and meditation for our upcoming educational administrators and principals. I also teach yoga, meditation, and various forms of fitness on multiple apps. I'm also a proud graduate of a historically Black college university, Prairie View A&M University. I am first generation American with Mexican immigrants, a proud brother of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which is the first historically Black fraternity, otherwise known as the Divine Nine here in the US. And this is something that hits home on many, many, many levels, being a Latin man in the United States of America. Thank you for having me, Brian. Appreciate you.
And Caesar, is it correct you've tested positive for COVID-19?
My partner Nicole and I are here in Queens, New York City, and we both did test positive. We were ill for about 11 weeks total, and it was something. And so we're luckily about 2 weeks post symptoms and are feeling good. And on top of everything else happening within the pandemic and the coronavirus, we are still trying to physically rehabilitate ourselves. And here we are now finding yet something else that's affecting our Black and brown brethren. And it is really something to speak to. And so I'm sure that we'll get into all of that. But yes, we are post-COVID and feeling good. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. Idris, tell us about yourself.
My name is Idris Sharugu, a father of four, a community organizer, living in Brampton, and most importantly, a very concerned citizen.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. I've got to tell you, it is such a pleasure for me to meet again Arnold, who is a classmate of mine from, I don't know, what is it, 30 years ago, Arnold?
32? 30, well, actually 34 from the beginning of school.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you again. Tell us about yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, Arnold Lewis. Brian and I met in '86 as classmates in grad school. I am based in Jersey City, New Jersey, just across the river from Manhattan, and have been here ever since we left school. So work in the tri-state area in financial services.
Fantastic. Lindsay.
Hello, I'm in Calgary. I'm a former member of the provincial legislature, MLA. I used to work in the Prime Minister's office back in the 80s. And I'm just happy to be here. I'm not happy to have to discuss this issue, but we have to discuss this issue.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Yes, hi there. My name is Kimberly Shelley Ajibalade, HR professional, community and political advocate. I am in Oakville, Ontario. Pleasure to be on the show. I just wish it was discussing a different topic, but nonetheless, it is upon us, and it needs to be addressed. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg Vesna, and I live in Mississauga. I'm an entrepreneur, an author, an inventor, a so-called expert in a couple of fields. But my biggest goal in life has been for the last 40 or so years to be involved in politics and try and bring about real big change. Lindsay and I worked on a campaign in 1985 when I ran as a conservative after running as a Green, and he was my campaign manager. I can tell you that didn't go over well with a few of the locals, but then he went to Alberta and became the Minister of Culture. So, you know, the more things change, the more they're same. I gotta say that there's been a lot of people in this fight for a long, long time and we see that there's finally going to be a conversation. And that's really what has always been needed. We just won't talk. Let's get it out, whether you agree or not, and then at least we know where everybody stands and accept each other's opinions, and then let's survive as a species.
One of the reasons why I wanted to include Greg tonight is I had him on my show a couple months ago. He's a emergency preparedness expert as well. And he was effectively predicting that something like this would happen because of COVID-19, because of people out of work, because of economic situations, et cetera. So I think that one of the things that we need to talk about is what are the catalysts, and clearly, what happened to one individual was a immediate catalyst, but it sees like it's a history of a lot of other things that and an environment that are the catalyst. Anyway, Garnet, you're last.
Yes, Garnet Manning, proud Bramptonian, former city councillor, city of Brampton. Moved to Canada 45 years ago as a teenager. And after 2 years getting oriented to Canada, I made a decision that I will not live as a fringe citizen, but I will participate in shaping this nation. I'm still working at that. And, just trying to make sure that I help build a community, a country where my grandchildren and their kids can feel safe.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. We're going to take a break for some messages. We're going to come back and we're going to get into this topic about what was the catalyst, what happened, and what should be happening, and what you think about the reaction to it. Stay with us, everybody.
White teeth, eh?
Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've got a group of people together tonight to talk about what's happening in the United States. Why it's happening. Is it a protest? Is it a peaceful protest? Is it a riot? Is it looting? Is the response correct, both from the police, from the National Guard? Today, President Trump talked about bringing in the army. I want to hear from a bunch of people what's going on. So, Caesar, you're in Queens. I think Brooklyn has been one of the main places where some of the protests have happened. Tell me, if you could, why you think this has been such a flashpoint this past couple of days.
Thank you again, Brian. I neglected to mention in my intro that I'm also a 7-year U.S. military veteran. So, United States Navy, served proudly. Again, as first generation immigrant parents, you come here and there's a certain pride you carry in serving your country. The rioting that's happening that you mentioned in Brooklyn is happening all over Manhattan. As far north as Harlem, Bronx. I was in the city Saturday, witnessed some of the rioting, protesting, lower Manhattan. The element of putting out a military force to take care of people who are trying to protest. Be mindful again. And Trevor Noah, who's a well-known talk show host and comedian and just advocate, South African, correctly stated that a protest is not something you do correctly. There is no right way to protest. Everyone got on Colin Kaepernick because he took a knee. That's the wrong way to protest. Everyone got on the kids that were walking out of school to protest the school shootings that are happening in the United States. That's the wrong way to protest. And now people are wanting to then again reiterate that the incorrect way to protest is to burn buildings and loot and riot. Please be mindful that people are upset, people are angry, people have a right to voice their opinions. And a lot of that could have been and should have been quelled at the very top of our governmental structure. I said to you the last time we got interviewed, we've got a crime syndicate of an organization running our US government currently. And rather than stepping out and allowing for some sort of solace, some sort of peace to come out of his mouth, what does Trump do? Turns off the light on the White House completely. Then has protesters shot with rubber bullets, tear gas, so that he can walk across the street and falsely put up this image to share a photo opportunity in front of a church holding the Bible, very much the same way that Hitler did. There's a lot more into that, but what's happening right now has to happen. We all spoke of being, rightfully so, a little timid with having this difficult conversation. These conversations, just like you're allowing in this forum here, Brian, so thank you again, have to happen. And I'm so looking forward to hearing the rest of these wonderful panelists that you have here, speak to their opinions and their experiences.
Arnold, maybe I could come to you. You say you're in New Jersey. You know, you've been extremely successful. You went to Harvard Business School. You've worked successfully for a long period of time. What do you feel? What is the status of race relations in the United States right now? Do you feel racism in your daily life?
No, I don't in my daily life, but I know and see it exists. And so I think a lot of how we're here is we have not tackled issues that have been suppressed, really. And as Caesar was saying, there are conversations we have had to have since the end of the Civil War that we've never had as a country. We have never had, as they had in South Africa, truth and reconciliation. And so our history has really been written by the powers that be. The agenda has been really set by the powers that be. And as a minority, we are kind of by definition beholden to the decisions that are made by the majority. And I think what's become clear to me through my Facebook feed and my friends is that the majority population friends, so a lot of my white friends, they just do not have to wrestle with any of the issues that African Americans have to wrestle with on a daily, monthly, weekly basis with our friends, with our loved ones. So while it might not affect me every day, it affects me occasionally, but in terms of a direct impact. But there is an emotional impact from the extent that I talk to my friends, I talk to my family members. And it's not overt racism the way it used to be in America, but it's actually deeper than that. It's structural racism. It's the prison industrial complex. It's the unfairness of the justice system. It's the health disparities. It's all these things that are actually far more devastating than police brutality, in my opinion. So police brutality, you know, it's sad that people are brutalized and traumatized and killed by the police, but far more people are dying as a result of health disparities in our country. Far more people are dying because of economic disparities. Our health system is based on where a lot of our lower class people don't have, it's based on employer. And if you're not employed, or if you don't have a job that offers healthcare, you don't have healthcare. So these things are killing people every day. The life expectancy for African Americans are significantly lower because of these things that create stress and heart disease and hypertension. So those are the things that affect me on a daily basis because the structure is not changing, because the majority is not wrestling with these issues that really tax our community and cost us lives.
Garnet, maybe I could ask you, you know, we see these images on TV, we listen to Caesar and Arnold talk about the status of and the history of race relations in the United States. What's the situation in Canada? Are the things that Arnold talks about as problems, do they exist in Canada as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, the dynamics of what we're seeing now happening as a result of the incident in the States really brings out a much broader, maybe a broader view of what's happening to Black people everywhere, including Canada. So let me go back to that symbolism of this police officer's knee in the neck of a Black man who can't breathe. I believe that symbolism probably one day should be carved out and be in a museum, because it really tells the story of what the casual racism towards Black people in America, and in some sense in Canada here, and the disregards for their life. So the breathing, so to speak, is what we face every day, Brian. Breathing means driving a nice car. My son, 20, 30 years old, driving a nice car is going to be pulled over. We need to breathe. Going to the bank to change a check with $2,000, as an hassle. A friend of mine who owns a nice home is seen as a renter. The list goes on. Walk into a store and you're watched. It's not only in the States, it's here. The danger with Canadian racism, I can deal with some of these guys in the States who are coming out and using the N-word, but in Canada it's said to be more hypocritical. It's very subtle. It's dangerous. Is that microaggression that you face with every day. You're out there telling you you're less. And that's the danger. So Canadian like to look down south and believe we're gonna, they're off the hook. And Idris is here can tell you, he's actually in a battle with what's going on in Peel District School Board with our children for decades have been dealt with in a racist way. And the language of anti-Black racism has taken forefront now in Canada and in many of the municipalities. So yeah, we do have a problem here. And I'm glad that we're part of this conversation, because Canadians need to stand up and listen and to look into the mirror on themselves and say, we have a problem in Canada as well.
Idris, you were given the intro. Do we have a problem in Canada?
Yes, we do. We do. We may be in a position where sometimes we think our issues are not as big as those of our brothers in the States, but we have to understand that what our brothers are experiencing in the US, we are also experiencing here. In some cases to a lesser degree, and in some cases pretty much on par with what the brothers in the States are going through. For a Black person, having to explain yourself all the time, it's not something that white people or other people do. Every little thing you do is seen from a different angle. You having to explain yourself, you having to work twice as hard and get perhaps less. We look at the educational system in Canada. It follows a path, not much different with that of the US, with institutional racism. And sometimes we think because of the simplicity and the niceness of Canadians, don't get me wrong, we have a wonderful country. Can we make it better? Absolutely. Let's not deceive ourselves and think, well, we're such in a nice country and every Canadian has access to healthcare, has access to some of the basic things. But when it comes to the education aspect of it, we are lagging behind. Take example of the Toronto School Board. Take example of the PDSB. There's what is called the school to prison pipeline exists in Canada as well as in the States. The concept of continuous criminalization of young Black men exists in the States and exists in Canada. So we cannot act like these things are not happening here. One of the problems I think we as Canadians ought to do is understand and accept that we have these issues and hold our politicians accountable so that there's the political appetite in dismantling anti-Black racism. It is destroying us as a people. You have the segments of the population that don't feel that they belong. You may not hear us express it in anger like our brothers in the States do. There are reasons. That lack of expression with anger doesn't mean we're not going through the same thing. As a matter of fact, some of us have been in this, what I'll call in this situation, trying to address this, in particularly with the Peel District School Board, which most of us call a cesspool of racism. And I can challenge anybody to try to think otherwise of what the Peel District School Board does. And all school boards are not exempt. It just so happens that some of them have been brought to the forefront of the community. So do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely.
We do.
The racism in Canada? Absolutely. It's just covert as opposed to being overt.
So, Kimberly, maybe I can turn to you. When I see, when I hear people talk about being pulled over when Garnet was talking about his son being pulled over or going to a bank. I guess I can identify and understand that. But the brutality of a knee on a neck, which, and I'm surprised, frankly, listening to the American news about how many Black youth, African American youth, and males have been murdered. I can't identify that in Canada. Do people in Canada, do you in Canada identify with what's going on in Minneapolis?
Absolutely, we do. It was a few months ago. It was a teenager that lost his eye to that. So it's kind of like what Garnet and Idris alluded to, that it's just more quiet, if you will. But in many cases, we do experience those extremes. Sometimes not as much, but in other cases, yes. When Garnet speak about like pulling over and stuff like that, like we live in Oakville. My husband's been driving home before, and because he hesitated on a turn, there's 2 ways to get in, pull him over. It's like, oh, well, there was, we got reports of stolen cars in the neighborhood. So we're like, okay, well, did you run the plate? Did you see that I live around the corner type of thing? So, I mean, definitely Canada is not immune at all. I want to echo a little bit what Idris said, that the system and Caesar and some of the other people, that the system is flawed. That's the bottom line. We have a flawed system. I was very shocked to learn that the knee to neck technique is legal. And that's what probably we need to look at. That I do understand the notion of it controlling someone that's, being violent or aggressive. But for somebody that's unarmed and there's 10 of you and one of that person, I don't know that that's necessarily reasonable force, right? Law enforcement official, to my understanding, they're trained diligently, right? To know when and how to use force. Yet, how something like this would happen, it's just beyond me. So it's been a flawed system, not just from the extreme top, but from all the cities and provinces and towns. Everybody, all the affected officials, elected officials rather, needs to stand up. And so I'm all for protests. Obviously, we prefer if it's peaceful. We definitely don't want to see the likes of the LA 1992 riot. But when things happen over time and time and time and time again, for every action, there's a reaction. Earlier, you were talking a little bit, but before we individually came on, saying that what do we think is the catalyst? I think for so many years, or it's just gone on deaf ears. Just this year alone, we had like Ahmad in February, we had Brianna in March. And so now, even amid COVID, this pandemic that nobody's seen, they have to deal with this. People are thinking they don't care. So yeah, it's a flawed system that we definitely need to address. And we need to take a stand for sure. So we definitely need to protest. Like I said, obviously peaceful protest is best, but it's for every action, there's a reaction. And it's probably on account of that where we're seeing some of the extreme things happening right now. But the system is flawed. That needs to be addressed. It's just, I can't believe that in 2020, we're still dealing with this.
Lindsay, over to you. You're shaking your head, nodding your head. What's the situation like across Canada?
Sorry?
Lindsay, over to you. You're nodding your head.
Well, I think it's the same. A lot of people are frustrated, but if you're a Black person, we've been through this so many times. Rodney King, Alabama, Sharpsville, you just name it. It's like you get tired of it. You get tired of believing in the government doing the right thing. And it's not about just Black people. It's just about respecting people for who they are. We want equality in North America, in the world. We don't want special treatment. We just want to be accepted. I don't want to be on this show any more than anybody else does, because I don't want to be talking about why I'm Black and what I felt. I'm a business person. I'm an ex-politician. I've been doing this. I tell my kids to strive to be the best you can be in spite of who you are. I hate to have to go back to what we were as opposed to what we can be. And that's, I think, a lot of people in Canada just are confused as to why this is. But it's not just, it's about respecting people for who they are. And every individual has the opportunity to be a great person. We have to respect that and allow that.
Now, maybe I could turn to Greg. Greg, you were predicting this, not necessarily racism and the catalyst of the murder last week in Minneapolis. But what you were saying was that based on COVID-19, based on unemployment, layoffs, bankruptcies, etc., you were saying civil unrest was coming.
Well, they're not the same. They're, COVID-19 and my prediction of what was potential from that and this are two different events, and they don't really impact each other as much as the central point, which is slightly different, which is the conversation, which is all about this conversation about equality and accountability and inclusivity. And Canada is no better than anywhere else. We just have a different way of slicing the cake, okay? We claim to be this great multicultural society that takes care of our minorities, but everybody forgets what we did to our First Nations. 40% of our population in prison is not Black people in the United States, it's First Nations. Yep. So we have a very serious problem, not only with, and I get in trouble when I say all lives matter, but the reality is the only lives that matter in our society are the wealthy. And let me give you a perfect example. Brian, I'm going to ask you a question. What's the most important thing you need in politics?
Money.
Right. And what's the most important source of money in politics?
Donations.
Political contributions.
And
who makes the largest amount of political contributions?
Corporations.
No. Not Canada, legal. Males, especially white males. And name the provinces in Canada where political contributions are refundable, like the child tax credit. Ontario, Mike Harris did it. So in Justin Trudeau's, it's 2015, we're all equal in Ontario. If you're a woman or a minority or an immigrant or disabled or a senior or a youth, and you contribute that $100 to go to that rubber chicken dinner, and it's your rent, you pay $100. But the white man, he only pays 25 because he got $75 back. And so the discrimination against minorities, including the Blacks, is so deep within the political infrastructure and the social infrastructure that we're actually blind to it. Canada and the US are different fundamentally in one way. The US has a two-party system, and none of those parties can stop you from running for a seat or for a nomination. In Canada, you want to run for a party, we don't like your party on BDS, whatever, you're a Green, you're out. You want to run as a Conservative, we don't like your policy on abortion, you're out. No right to go to court, no constitutional right to run for office that's guaranteed. The courts of Canada have said the only right you have to run for office in Canada is if you run for one of the major parties, except you don't have the right to do that. Well, look at a woman that wants to run a campaign in a Liberal Party. All the nominations for existing ridings were closed. So if you're going to run, you got to run in a riding we lost.
Okay.
So let me finish quick.
Let me interrupt. Let me ask Arnold. Arnold, Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, was actually talking about exactly what Greg was talking about in a letter that he wrote, an article that he wrote, because he said, some people say you can't change things by changing government. And so therefore don't go out and vote. And he was saying, yes, you can actually change. You had a president, 2 terms, that was African-American. How come things didn't change?
Can I answer that too?
Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead.
So I'll take the first shot at it. So Barack ran as a pure centrist, and he ran as his contributions were from large party donors and Wall Street, and the other factor I think for the reason things didn't change was I don't think he took advantage of the power that he initially had when they had 60 Senate seats. He tried to go along to get along, so he didn't ram things through. He tried to build consensus, and he wasted time. And then at the 2-year mark, he had to deal with a Republican majority in the Senate. And so as a result, and they obstructed him every step of the way.
Right.
And if you remember, you know, a lot of the pushback was around fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what happened as soon as the Republicans came in?
They blew their brains out.
They put in a 1.5 trillion tax cut, annual tax cut, that is not paid for. So it was bogus. It was pure and simple obstruction of his agenda.
So we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these protests that have become riots and what government should do. We've got a great group of panelists tonight talking about what's going on in the United States. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a great panel of interesting people from Brampton and Mississauga and Toronto and Calgary and Queens and New Jersey all together today to talk about what's going on in the United States. Caesar, you're in Queens. These protests started out peaceful, but particularly in New York and Minneapolis and Washington, night after night, we've seen them become more violent. What's going on? And tell me what you think about the police response, and what do you think that government should do? And frankly, I've seen an argument between your mayor and your governor as to bringing in the National Guard. Tell us what's going on.
Thank you. Again, I will give a brief history lesson for the United States of America. Our police force, our current police force, began as a way to regulate slaves. It was a way for white slaveholders in order to keep their slaves on their property. So it began institutionally at the beginning of our country within the founding fathers. Move on to prior to Civil War. You've got this police force that is there and responsible for ensuring that the slaves didn't leave property, didn't interact with white people, but yet you still had white slave owners freely raping, pillaging, and beating Black women, Black men. Let's fast forward now to the civil rights movements within the 60s and 70s. How often do we find ourselves at the beginning of peaceful protests? And how often did we find that there were dogs sicked on people, that there were garden hoses, fire hoses, not garden hoses, fire hoses turned on? How often did Dr. Martin Luther King speak of walking peacefully? And every single time that there was something riotous that occurred, there was an instigation, and I would not say that the benefit and of the peaceful protest was correctly being ensued. It was almost always an instigation. Fast forward to now, 2020, we're all in disbelief that this is still happening. All of these protests that are beginning, what is going on with the excessive use of police force? They are being told by their higher ups to, by any means necessary, go ahead and disperse these crowds, forgetting that these crowds have the right to stand there and voice their opinions. Can we not forget that not even 3 weeks ago, we had armed white men carrying semi-automatic rifles walking into Capitol buildings, government properties, threatening minority lawmakers, and yet nothing.
And
tear gas,
encouraged by your president, no?
That's the whole, yes. A lot of what I was speaking to earlier is that it's okay if you're protesting. Well, you know what? These are good individuals. These are good citizens. The white men that are walking into Subway carrying a fucking bazooka, it's okay, because these men mean well. But yet the minute a group of Black students come together, the group of people just, again, peacefully protesting, decide to shout, no justice, no peace, you're raising your voice. It has always been in this country about making sure that Black voices are not heard and that they are contained.
Right.
Lindsay, Lindsay, you've been in government.
Oh.
What would you have been doing if you were in government in Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Well, right now, I mean, human rights bill was my bill. And that means that in Canada, that in Alberta, that means you have access to government services, you have access to employment, you have access to accommodation. A lot of people forget about those things, and these basic rights have been fundamentally flawed in the US for years. So it's hard to start with a benchmark to be able to come up with an equality for that. But at the same time, you have to, as a government, your responsibility is to protect the majority of the people from the minority of the people who are, whoever they are, whatever their view is.
That's right.
And we fail to do that. We fail to do that in a fundamental way right across every government across North America. You're there as a police officer, you're there to serve and protect. Who are you there to serve and protect? You're supposed to serve and protect every single individual that's under your jurisdiction. Just like every politician is supposed to protect and serve every constituent, irregardless of whether they voted for you or not, or irrespective, I should say. And that's the problem. It's how do we fundamentally make sure our laws, our Constitution, actually empower us to protect the people we're supposed to protect.
Kimberly, maybe I can ask you, when I started watching the protests a couple of days ago, you had a great deal of sympathy for what was going on and disgust at police brutality. But the last couple of nights, the looting, the reaction starts to, and I'm clearly looking at it as a white male, not as an African Canadian or an African American. But you start to say, this is bad, this is wrong, this is our anarchy, and we got to stop it. Now, maybe I don't like the way that they're stopping it, but how do you react when you watch these protests that have turned into riots on TV?
Oh, I mean, it's just, we're in a total shock. It's kind of just what I said earlier. Really don't want to see it get to what happened in 1992, but I just think that people are just tired and frustrated. Mind you, it's not the first killing. Mind you, they didn't do all of this earlier in the year. I talked about Ahmad and I talked about Brianna, but I think people are thinking that they don't care. So to Greg's point, when he was saying that he gets in trouble when he says that all lives matters, yes, all lives matter, but only until they recognize that Black lives matter is where the all can come in. And I think that's part and parcel of the problem. It's just been surreal, just unfolding before your eyes. You're on edge, you're angry at the same time, you're afraid. It's just a bunch of mixed emotions at this point. But like I said, it just goes back to the system that is flawed. That's where we need to tackle it. And it's the elected officials that can do that. And in us taking a stand, I believe that's one of the ways that we can foster change, because change needs to come, change has to come. So yeah, that's just my take on that part. We hope that it doesn't get much more. We see looting and different type of things. We don't even know at this point if it's the protesters, because I believe there's a good handful of peaceful protesters still. We see those. So at this point, it's unclear is it the actual protesters now that's really doing those extreme things? Is it some and not? And it's unclear.
Idris, over to you, and then to Lindsay.
So for me, and I think for some of us, it is strange if the narrative is being focused right now on the looting. Somebody lost their life for over $20. And we watched this young man's life just taken in horror. And we're focused on looting. Now, this has happened. The lists are endless. The lists of this incident are endless. So let's assume the situation were reversed. Anyone's life is important. We're talking about looting. We're talking, and there are questions with regards to who is actually doing the looting. That's one. And secondly, we have to understand there's a contract between the government and its people. if African Americans have been have continuously been victimized and there is nothing that's happened, you go to court, the perpetrators walk scot-free. You get to a point where you want to be able to get the attention of policymakers. If we've seen this happen, like my brother Cesar said, from slavery to the eras of Jim Crow to 2020, we heard, let's go back, that particular police officer was an officer when Eric Garner was choked to death. When he casually put his knee and his hand in his pocket to take a man's life. Yes, what happened was they were fired immediately, but that did not resolve it. Let's think about the hurt and pain, frustration. So we shouldn't focus more on the looting as opposed to the lives and decisions that have not been taken. In that same state, Officer Noor was sentenced to 12.5 years for mistakenly shooting a white lady that startled him. If he happened, what happened to Fernando Castillo? What happened to Tamir Rice? What happened to Eric Garner? What happened to the list of endless? At a point in time, you have to say to yourself, does peaceful protests, now no one is advocating for total destruction, anarchy, but how do you get the attention of policymakers when they've continuously ignored the pain and suffering of the people?
Lindsay, over to you, and then to Garrett.
Well, I don't disagree. I think that people got to the point that they're so frustrated and they don't know what they're going to do. I think that we're going to see much worse in the United States before it gets better. I think if, we'll see what happens with these 4 officers, including Govan, whether they're actually tried and convicted. And I would say this particular time, we've gone through the litany from Rodney King, and we've gone through all those different names. We all know them. But if you don't freaking come to it's 2020. It's 60 friggin' years since Rosa Parks. Get the fucking clue. We need to change today. And it's not a liberal issue. It's not a conservative issue. It's not an NDP issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an issue of treating people fairly. And if you're an advanced society anywhere in the world, you have to treat everybody equally. And if not, and if you don't evolve, revolution will happen and they will burn a lot of those cities to the ground. And that is not a idle comment. That's where they're going, because we've been through this for 60 friggin' years and nothing has changed.
Well, it certainly may happen. But you probably saw this interview with the chief of police from Minneapolis, an African American. He couldn't have been more empathetic to the family. He immediately fired the 4 police officers.
He didn't immediately fire them. He waited days to fire them.
Exactly. It wasn't an immediate firing.
Exactly.
It took the voice of the people shouting before the Minneapolis PD decided to let them go. And to update you on that, the 3 other officers that have been subpoenaed for possible arrest are now declaring publicly that they are not going to cooperate with law enforcement. They are all pleading the 5th Amendment, which in the United States gives them the right to remain silent. Because they're not cooperating. There was no immediate firing. No.
Okay, but
guys.
Chief of police is an African American, empathetic, spoke incredibly well, and if he can't make change, if Barack Obama can't make change, what do we got to do?
This has been a part of our history. The United States of America has been rooted in this institutionalized racism, this gender inequality, the fact that you can't be black, you can't be brown, you can't be an immigrant, you can't be a woman, you can't be gay, you can't be bi, you can't be trans in the US without facing some sort of oppression or backlash. The reason why Barack couldn't change it is because he only had 8 years. And then Barack because that's what we do. We have a balance of power in the US. The Republicans said, nope. We're finally getting to the point where it's like, no, even the Republicans are going, Trump. pull your head out of your ass. We have to figure out a way to save this. You know why? Because my corporate stocks are being threatened here. I have money invested. I need you to realize all of that. So please forgive me for jumping in, but this has been a part since day one.
Right, let me just jump in now. Yeah.
Garrett, you want to get in.
So guys, I'll say, just stop the insanity. Let's really ask ourselves a question. What percentage of the millions and millions of protesters are looting? Guys, it's a game. It's distraction 101. Get off that horse. It's been happening for years. It shows me that the government, they're not sincere in addressing this horrible problem of systemic racism and oppression in America. I looked at a video recently. Around the world, I would say we have 1 billion people at least. In Canada, US, Finland, Italy, people are marching, calling out America to change. And we choose to focus on a small percentage of criminal in a time like this, 2020, we're still playing that game. I find it extremely disgusting and insulting to begin with, because I saw Trump using this same narrative as looters to enact some kind of laws that is just crazy. When I listened to him yesterday talking about this curfew. So please, intelligent people, this is a game. There's going to be looters. They come out every time, but they're not even a percentage of the peaceful protesters who are saying, bring back the narrative to what really matters, and that is this decades of systemic racism, the casual racism, the disregards to Black lives in the United States and over the world. And we're simply saying, allow us to breathe. We're not asking to be your friends. We're not asking you to love us. Just respect us, leave us alone. When I go into the park with my kids, I don't want nobody bother me and treat me differently. I just want to be treated like everybody else so I can have a better quality of life, like everybody going to their bed. I want to know when my grandkids go out, they're safe. They don't have to worry about police or anybody else bothering them. That's all we're asking for, man. I don't want you to like me. I don't want to be your friends. I want to like you. Friends. I like you, Brian. I like you. But I have too many friends to be worried about who likes me. I just need to be respected. But get off that bandwagon about looters. It's not about looting. It's a very small minority.
Okay,
So
we got to take a break. We'll come right back in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got this great panel of people from across North America chatting about what's going on in the United States right now. And I wish I could go on for another hour, but I only got a couple of minutes left. And I've asked each one of them to give me what their message would be to the youth in either the United States or Canada today. And second of all, to governments today. Caesar, over to you.
To the youth and the governments all over the world, take a moment, stop, take a deep breath. The power of breath is going to allow our parasympathetic nervous system to activate so that we can calmly respond. Stand strong, continue to fight, continue to use your voice. Don't raise your voice, better your argument. Government, listen to listen to listen. Change has to happen right now. No more of this. We're sick.
Idris.
To the youth and governments of the world, one is for the youth to start getting engaged and understanding policies and political, to get involved in political parties or any of the parties, get engaged. And to the government, silence will no longer solve anything. You have to create policies that will address diversity, inclusion, and equity. In the absence of that, this ugliness will creep up to countries like Canada and other Western countries. Gone are the days where we think it's just going to be primarily dominated by one ethnic groups, but inclusion, diversity would solve a lot of problems.
Lindsay.
One thing I've learned in politics is that you can be whatever you want to be. But what we have to do as a country, the Human Rights Bill in Alberta is my bill. access to government services, access to employment, access to accommodation are the principles of every human rights bill in the country. We forgot that we have to treat everybody equally. That bill is not for blacks. That is for every race, color, and creed, every age, man, woman, and child in the country. As a government, just enforce it. Just do what you're supposed to do. Treat us all equally. We want nothing special. We just want to be treated as equals. Period. If you don't, our kids will demand it, and it will not come cheaply.
Garnet, over to you.
To the youth, you have the potential to change your world. Let nobody tell you anything different. And to the politicians, we're not looking for politicians. We're looking for leaders. Step up to the plate.
Amen.
Arnold.
I would say to the youth, don't follow what your parents have done in this case.
Amen.
Chart your own course. And I think we've seen a lot of change among the youth, and they have a different vision for the future. And I would just say, go for it and pursue it. And then to governments, I would say revolutions are never neat and clean. And the longer that the message is ignored, the messier it's going to get. And so they can focus on the looting, they can focus on the rioting, but don't ignore the message.
Gregory.
I think that to young people, you got to know what the ask is. Part of the problem is that we didn't learn from Arab Spring, okay? We didn't learn from Rodney King. We don't ever learn because we don't force change. We have, as the other commenter said, we have to get involved in the political system. We've got to get our nose bloody. We've got to get our hands dirty. We got to have them deny our nominations. We got to have outrage, because the alternative is anarchy, period. Yeah, there's lots of jobs created when you burn stuff down because you've got to rebuild it after, and all those goods have to be remanufactured.
But they're
But
not
what's the cost? So that's to the young people and to my governments, I would say, in the words of William F. Buckley Jr., a great American conservative, I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 names in the white pages than the entire faculty of Harvard.
Kimberly, the second to last word is to you.
Yes. To the young people, it's just that there's no time like the present to get involved, just to encourage them to be a part of the change that they need. It is so important to do that. And to government and elected officials, deflecting is not going to work any longer. Tokens are not going to work any longer. We need real change, and it needs to happen now. So we don't want our protests and or standing up to fall on deaf ears. The time for change is now. The time for action is now.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. It's been a fascinating conversation. I want to bring you all back in a week or two to talk about what's happening. And maybe I could just finalize with a couple of words of my own. Arnold, you may remember Diane White. We had about 30 years ago a conversation in Manhattan. Diane White was an African-American in the same class as Arnold and I. And we were having this conversation, and she said, Brian, you just don't understand what it's like. And she said, I'm going to walk out to that street over there, Fifth Avenue, and try to get a taxi to take me north to Harlem, and no one will stop. And you're going to walk out and you're going to get a taxi in 10 seconds. And we tested it, and she couldn't get a taxi, and I could get a taxi in no time flat. I'm going to disagree with Garnet, who said he didn't want to be my friend. Garnet, I think the solution is that we've got to make friends. We've got to communicate. We've got to talk to people. We've got to understand where and how people that are different than us live and what their experiences are, because that's the only way we're going to be able to identify. I had a privilege of 2 years ago going to Lagos, Nigeria, and I spoke at a conference. After about the second and a half day, I looked around and realized I was the only non-Black person in the room. And you know what? The first day, maybe I was a little uncomfortable. After the second and third day, I was completely comfortable. I had forgotten that I look different than everyone else. You got to have those experiences. You got to go into an environment and make friends with Garnet and Lindsay and Kimberly, etc. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. Have a great evening, and let's do this again sometime.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Coming back.
Nice
Thank you.
being here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.